各位观众朋友们，今天给大家看一段堪称冷战思维活化石的演讲视频。视频里的这位嘉宾是美国斯坦福大学的智库学者，他在接下来的这十几分钟里大谈特谈所谓的第二次冷战，疯狂炒作台海危机，甚至嫌弃美英澳奥库斯 AUKUS 核潜艇协议交货太慢，指手画脚地催促澳大利亚赶紧备好针对中国的军事 B 计划。在大家观看原片之前，我只做一句简短的点评，请大家带着这个视角去品一品。一个远在大洋彼岸，一旦打仗绝对不用自己上战场的美国学者，为什么这么着急上火的要把四面环海、安居乐业的澳大利亚往大国对抗的最前线推？他嘴里喊着维护印太稳定，兜里到底装的是谁的算盘？
What I'm going to try and do in the next 10 minutes is to set Australia's strategic predicament in some kind of historical and global perspective. Since the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, countries like Australia, but the same is true of the United States and its other Asian allies, not to mention its European allies, have been enjoying what was called a peace dividend. Defense budgets all around the world went down significantly in the 1990s, and they stayed down in the Australian case, hovering around 2% of gross domestic product, sometimes less, until very recently. And I think it will surprise future historians that so many countries were still spending so little on defense as recently as 2020. Because as far as I could see, for some years before 2020, the world was already moving into a new Cold War. The interwar period, the time between Cold War I and Cold War II, lasted from really the early 1990s until, let's say, around 2016. What brought that interwar period to an end and began the Second Cold War? I think it was partly the advent of Xi Jinping as the Chinese leader, but I think it was also the backlash against globalization that characterized politics in so many countries, not least the United States, producing President Trump's first election victory in 2016, as well as disruptions like Brexit, the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union. An arms race has been going on for some time, in Asia especially, but in that race, most of the running has been done by the People's Republic of China. The scale of Chinese rearmament, or just plain armament, under Xi Jinping is breathtaking. China is on its way to being the third nuclear superpower. It has already amassed hundreds of warheads. Soon there will be thousands of warheads. China has not only acquired a massive nuclear capability under Xi Jinping, it has also acquired a huge range of non-nuclear missile capabilities, including hypersonic missiles capable of hitting targets as far away as Guam, a crucial nerve center for US military communications. So I think future historians will wonder why it took so long for countries such as Australia to appreciate the implications of this extraordinarily rapid arms build-up. Even the United States has been remarkably slow in the uptake. Think of it. China's navy, at least in terms of numbers of vessels, is now larger than the United States Navy. That's an extraordinary change. And the economic balance of power has also tilted in China's favor. 20 years ago, US manufacturing value added was roughly double that of China. Today, China's is roughly double that of the United States. China is the workshop of the world. And it's manufacturing not only solar cells, batteries, and electric vehicles, but who knows how many drones. This Cold War, like the first Cold War, isn't all cold. Just as in the first Cold War there were hot wars in countries such as Korea, as well as, of course, in Vietnam, there are hot wars in Cold War II. The most striking of these, certainly the most violent to date, is in Ukraine. And I want to draw your attention to these key trouble spots, two of which are live and one of which could become live imminently. In Ukraine, war broke out, in fact, long ago, in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and established puppet republics in Donetsk and Luhansk. The war is just about to enter its fifth year. Russian casualties probably exceed 250,000. It's a war of extraordinary brutality, mainly because of the use of drones. The war in Ukraine is the first drone war, and it is a new kind of revolution in military affairs, where literally millions of drones are being produced by the two sides each year. 70 to 80% of casualties are caused by drones. This is a new kind of war, and Australia is just one of the many countries that have not fully adapted to this change in the nature of conflict. In 2023, another trouble spot turned hot, or perhaps hotter, on October 7th, 2023, when Iranian proxies, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad launched a pogrom against Israeli civilians. War in the Middle East was never just about Gaza. Israel has been fighting, some say, a seven-front war, and as I speak to you, an aircraft carrier group of the United States is in position in the Persian Gulf for what seem to me quite likely to be further airstrikes against Iran to put a definitive end to Iran's ambitions to become a nuclear armed power. So one can expect more hot war fairly imminently, I think, in the Middle East. The third trouble spot that isn't yet hot, but is certainly warming up, is of course Taiwan. The capstone of Xi Jinping's career would be to bring Taiwan under the control of the Chinese Communist Party the way he's been able to bring Hong Kong under its control, putting an end to civil and political liberties, despite all talk of two systems. The fate of Taiwan hangs in the balance. It certainly will be the object of negotiations this year, but it seems to me increasingly likely that at some point imminently, and by that I mean in the next 3 years, China will make some kind of move against Taiwan. I don't believe it will be a full-scale amphibious invasion. I think it could be a blockade, or it might be something in a grey area, something, as Ike Fryman argues in his forthcoming book Defending Taiwan, that would be hard to define as war because it might be presented as simply a quarantine. That was the term used by John F. Kennedy when the United States quarantined Cuba in 1962, the most dangerous moment in the first Cold War. My fear is that we are hurtling towards not a Cuban Missile Crisis, but a Taiwanese semiconductor crisis, the economic consequences of which will be far greater than the consequences of the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the military risks of which will be at least as big. China has shown that it's capable of encircling Taiwan, of violating its airspace at will. Its most recent naval exercises at the beginning of this year were the biggest that we've yet seen. And Xi Jinping harps on, in public as well as, I believe, in private, on the subject of Taiwan and the supposed threat that proponents of independence pose to China's One China policy. So for Australia, the world has become a great deal more dangerous than it was in the 1990s and in the 2000s. And I think it's been getting more dangerous for pretty much the last 10 years. It's high time that Australia took appropriate action. There's one last thing I want to point out. In a situation like this, you can take the right action, but get the timing wrong. AUKUS is important. The United States needs allies like Australia and the United Kingdom in order to bolster the stability of the Indo-Pacific region. But a plan that only delivers nuclear-powered submarines to Australia between the 2030s and 2050s is not an answer to the urgent problem of the 2020s. It strikes me, as I look at the problem from a distance, sitting here in the Hoover Institution on the Stanford campus, that Australia does need a plan B, a short-run plan to address the threat that is posed by China to the stability of the Indo-Pacific region. Japan seems to me more alive to this threat today than Australia is. And I very much hope that in your deliberations, you will come up with that urgently needed plan B, not instead of AUKUS, but before it, when it is urgently needed.
看完这段视频，我真是对堪培拉的那帮政客有一种恨铁不成钢的无力感。 看看刚才视频里这位老爷是怎么对着澳大利亚发号施令、贩卖焦虑的。澳大利亚好歹也是个独占一块大陆的主权国家吧，四面环海，得天独厚，离欧亚大陆那些个战火连天的火药桶隔着108000里，家里有矿，牛羊成群，得天独厚的地理和资源条件，只要踏踏实实做生意，跟谁交好不行，闷声发大财不好吗？结果呢，堪培拉的政客们非要做出违背常理的蠢事，非要听这帮大洋彼岸的冷战遗老忽悠，好好的安生日子不过，非得削尖了脑袋去当人家在亚太地区的桥头堡，去疯狂挑衅自己最大的金主和贸易伙伴，这不是脑子进水了是什么？这简直是守着金饭碗去向别人讨要一张随时会送命的卖身契。视频里这位学者大谈特谈中国的军力增长，连珠炮似的吓唬人。我想反问澳大利亚的决策者们，人家智库动动嘴皮子让你买军火，你就真掏空国库去买，几千亿澳元砸进去，等2050年潜艇造出来，黄花菜是不是都凉透了？再说了，人家中国在造舰，在发展核武，那是冲着你澳大利亚去的吗？你一个卖铁矿石、卖红酒的国家，人家图你什么？图你袋鼠多吗？人家发展军力是为了自保，是为了防着那个满世界建军事基地，天天开着军舰在别人家门口转悠的霸权国家。你们心里没点数吗？非要上赶着去认领这个假想敌的帽子，到处给自己树敌，图个什么？